just want to say how stoked I am to be back at Kealakekee High School. I met Principal Murakami 10 years ago, before Kanu, doing work as a consultant on school leadership, and he was an outstanding school leader then, and he still is an outstanding school leader now. Worked with Will and Art Souza, who I'm not sure is still here, but I saw him earlier this morning. And then shortly after that, through Kanu, got to work with David and actually engaged a bunch of Kealakekee High School students on creating the first video PSA for Kanu Hawaii, and then launched a project. David and I collaborated on a project called Do Bands, where students manufactured a bunch of silicone wristbands, each with a unique identification number and a website. And the idea was you do a good deed, you pass the band on to somebody else, you log your good deed on the website, and each successive owner of the band could go back and log into the site and see who had held the band before them and what good deed they had done. But it was a really awesome learning experience for me, I hope for the students too. But the essence of Kanu Hawaii, it's a nonprofit organization. We launched it in about 2008. And the idea was to build a movement of people who were willing to drive community change, starting with themselves, who would make personal commitments to something that they wanted to, that they felt strongly about, whether it be the environment or a more compassionate community or public service. But they would start with a change in their own life. They would publish that online, share it with a community of people that would then hold them accountable and also be a source of support for them. And out of that idea grew a bunch of projects. If you have questions about Kanu, you can ask me about it during the Q&A session, because actually I'm not going to talk anymore about Kanu today. What I wanted to share really comes more from a perspective that I developed sort of on the tail end of Kanu and after Kanu. So I stepped down as Kanu's executive director at the beginning of last year, in part because I had become a father. When I started Kanu, I was single, had tons of free time, was not in a partnership with a partner I now have. During the course of Kanu, I became a father to a Hanai son. He was 3 years old when I met him. He's 8 years old now. He's in 3rd grade at Wilson Elementary School in Honolulu. We're about as different as two people can be, probably. He's a real guy's guy. He loves sports. He's pretty rough and tumble. He knows more about the NFL than I ever knew or care to know. And I, on the other hand, am the nerdy, quiet type, usually pretty mild-mannered. So we get on each other's nerves sometimes, but we love each other, and he's my son. So what I wanted to talk about really was 3 things that I feel like I learned from him and from trying to be a good father to him. And I'm not a professional educator. I'm not an educator by training, so I'm hoping that some of what I have to share from a parent's perspective translates into the educational realm and into the realm of other families. Before I get into the 3 specific things, I should say that they all stem from this a sort of broader observation that I feel like I've had over the course of Kanu and since Kanu, trying to be a good partner and a good parent. And that is, I'm continually amazed by how much in my own life and in the life of people around me, my energy, other people's energies are devoted to working out, healing, correcting, addressing traumas that we experienced as children. Yeah, I'm just amazed by that. I mean, how much of my own life and other people's lives is directed by and affected by that. And so I guess that led me to a larger observation, which is the view that the amount of violent conflict in the world at any moment, I suspect, is probably directly correlated with the amount of trauma today's adults experienced as children. And so the way I view my role as parent is I consider it my first job to try to prevent trauma in my son's life, to try to help him heal from any trauma that he might experience, and then most importantly, to avoid being a source of trauma myself whenever possible. But that's sort of my overall philosophy of my first parental priority. And the 3 things I'm trying with my son that I'm going to share all relate to and stem from that core belief, okay? So the first thing I'm trying with my son is I'm trying to have a peaceful heart even when I'm at war with him. And I don't know if this is true for all parents, but I am sometimes at war with my son, my 8-year-old son, which seems like a ridiculous thing to say, but I am sometimes. And I'll give you a specific example. When he was in kindergarten, we started to get calls from his teacher and then later from the principal about things that were happening on the playground. Like he would be tripping other kids as they were running back into the classroom after recess. He pantsed one of his classmates in front of everybody else on the playground. And each time he came home, or we had to go to school to talk about this, I would ask him, why did you do that? You know, why'd you pants Keoki? He says, oh, I thought it would be funny. Why did you trip those kids as they were coming around the corner running back into class? Oh, I wanted to see them fly. And I grew up in the era of dirty lickings. You know, when you did something like that at school, you went home, you got lickings. And it took a lot of energy and effort for me not to resort to that kind of reaction to him. And I tried my best to put my response in terms that conformed in my mind to what a compassionate response was, which was saying things like, look, I got to tell you this because I love you, or I'm giving you this consequence because I love you, but you know, I want you to have friends at school, and you cannot do this to people if you want to have friends. Or, you know, how would you like it if that was you? How would you like it if that happened to you? If someone, one of your friends, one of your classmates did that to you? Most of the time that I did this, it seemed to have little effect, okay? The stuff kept happening on the playground. And I started to get angrier and angrier. Okay, I started to feel like, you know, what is wrong with you? I wouldn't say that, but that's how I was feeling inside as I was delivering my message to him. Even if the words were, I'm telling you this because I love you. It was like, I'm telling you this because I love you. God damn it. You know, that was the attitude and the feeling I was holding inside. And what I came to realize after a while was that my anger and this warlike feeling I was carrying on inside me, number one, had a lot less to do with him than it had to do with me and my own personal hang-ups, okay? So, you know, I had these kind of unexamined beliefs about myself, a real problem with bullies, a real problem with people that were gonna take advantage of other people and hurt other people. Of course, at 8 years, or actually at that time he was 5 years old, so he had no conception of that. I had that framework in my mind. I probably also had this belief that I had learned growing up that showing anger was a way to make a lesson stick, you know? And then after a while, when it didn't work after a few times, it also became an issue of power. Like, hey, why aren't you listening to me? I told you this 3 times already, you know? And my anger and this war I felt in myself, I came to realize was more about me than about him. And the second thing that I realized was it was making me completely ineffective. Because every time I stopped to talk to him, I could see either fear or sadness in his eyes, and that meant that whatever I was saying was not getting through to him, yeah? And so I guess the first thing I'm trying is to have a heart at peace even when I feel like I'm at war with him, or the interaction would suggest that I'm at war with him. And it wasn't until probably long after I had tried and failed at this a couple of times that I came across a book called The Anatomy of Peace. And it's written by an organization called the Arbinger Institute. But the essence of the book is that as I observed my own experience, an action taken with a warring heart invites resistance. The exact same action taken with a heart at peace can invite change, yeah? And being the kind of person I am and the kind of temperament I have, I know I'm not gonna be able to do this 100% of the time. It may be superhuman to expect ourselves to have a peaceful heart every time we're at war with somebody. So I'm shooting for somewhere between 30% and 50% of the time with my son. But I've seen it work with him. I've seen that when I'm able in those moments when I want to, bust out the yardstick like my mom used to bust out on me, in those warring moments, when I am able to take a step back and come from a place of love for him instead of anger that really is pulling all this other baggage that's about me and not him into the situation, the message gets through. And this comes right out of that book. And if you're interested in the book, obviously I've given you the title, but I wrote a review of the book on a site called Mindful Hawaii, mindfulhawaii.org, and you can check out sort of the summary version there. But one of the lessons that I drew from the book was, and it rang true for me, was that so many problems in life, the authors say, the solution has to be more than just discipline or correction. In fact, we should spend more time helping things go right than correcting things that are going wrong. And sadly, how we spend our time tends to be flipped, right? We spend more of our time working on correcting the things that are going wrong than encouraging the things that are going right. And even more sadly, sometimes we exist in systems that are designed around addressing the things that are going wrong versus supporting the things that are going right. But it's helped me to keep that in mind, trying to shift my time allocation that way. So that was the first thing I'm trying. The second thing I'm trying as a parent is I'm trying to pay attention to my na'au as a guide and to teach my son to do the same. So for those of you who are not familiar with the term na'au, it's roughly translated as the gut in Hawaiian. And a Hawaiian friend of mine, someone I consider a mentor, explained to me that in the Hawaiian culture, the belief is that there are multiple seats of knowledge, right? There's the head, there's the heart, the source of emotion, there's the body, you can learn by doing and feeling, and then there's the gut, the na'au. And of all these sources, the na'au was deemed the most trustworthy, okay? Your logic and perception might mislead you, your emotions might mislead you, even what you think you're seeing or sensing might mislead you, but this was the trusted source and seat of knowledge. And especially knowledge that was hard to come by just through observation and experience, yeah. And probably every spiritual tradition has something, a belief like that, a way of knowing that is beyond the rational or the physically perceptible. But I've tried to become more in tune myself with what I might describe as sort of an intuitive sense of what is right and wrong, and it takes quieting my mind, quieting the intellect, quieting my emotions, often quieting what's happening in a sensory way around me. And for my son, it's led me to the practice of asking separate questions of what do you think, what do you feel, and what does your gut tell you? And at home we use something that maybe many of you have used in your homes or in your practice, but a picture of a body and asking him where is he feeling something when something happens, yeah? Or when he's made a decision, where are you feeling that? Is that a decision that's coming from up here? Is it in here? Is it down here? And I wouldn't say that it's settled in on an intellectual level yet, but I want him to get in the practice of knowing where different judgments and feelings are coming from. I think really the most useful entry point for him that I've seen has been sports. So baseball, which he started 2 years ago, is the first time I've seen him really develop a passion for learning and for practice. And one of the things that he's started to do after some coaching is when he's at bat, if he feels like he's getting a little too anxious, he'll step out of the batter's box and he'll put the bat up to his forehead and he'll take a deep breath and then he'll step back into the box. And what he's doing is trying to center himself, trying to get a feel for what the situation is. And to me, that's the beginning of trusting an intuitive way of knowing, an intuitive way of making decisions. But that has been tremendously valuable for him and for me. For those of you that are interested in exploring that subject more deeply, any of the writings of Manu Meyer from this island speak in a very deep and mind-bending way about the different seats of knowledge, ancestral knowledge, and traditional Hawaiian knowledge. And for those of you who are into a more modern and scientific take on it, just Google the words gut and brain together, and you'll be amazed at the number of studies that have been released very recently in the last 5 years with neuroscientists, doctors, and biologists about the gut as a second brain. There are a number of neurons in the gut, in the digestive tract, second only to the number of neurons in our brain. And there are all kinds of connections between the hormones and the precursors to hormones that our gut produces that communicate with our brain and our central nervous system. So I thought that was interesting as a side note, that sort of modern science has sort of stumbled upon this very ancient notion of the gut has something important to tell us. The last thing I'll share that I'm trying with my son is I'm trying to be a good gift finder. And by that I mean to be on the lookout for what his gifts are and to encourage him to look for the gifts in others too. I know that one of his gifts at this point is not reading and writing. He really struggles with that. I'm trying to at least get him to the point where he enjoys it, but not his forte. He does excel at things to do with numbers, I've found. He enjoys math, and he operates really well in an environment where the incentives and the rewards are very clear and transparent. And so what that's led to for us is one day I broke out my old collection of baseball and football cards from the 1980s. He started to look at the backs of the cards and ask about the statistics, what the batting average was, why pitchers had numbers of strikeouts each year. So he really got into the stats. And then one day we were on the iPad together, and he had found a card in my pile. He said he wanted to look it up. And so he looked up the price online, and that was the first time something clicked in his head about, well, these things are actually worth money. There's a value associated with this. And so we started looking up some of the cards that we would dig out of the pile, and he started developing a collection of his own. And then the next step was taking a look at eBay and, how many of these things are on sale. And so his prize card was a Tony Gwynn rookie card from 1983. And online it said, that people were selling it for $150, $200. He said, well, I'm going to sell it for $1 million. I said, well, you can put it up on eBay for $1 million, and I hope some sucker buys it, and then we can both retire now. But he started to understand the concept of prices and supply and demand, and it's led into this whole learning experience of numbers and business. And I've tried to be on the lookout for those gifts, because going back to what I said earlier about spending more time correcting the things that are going wrong than encouraging the things that are going right. I think, all of us, certainly I have a tendency to do that. I spend a lot more time and emotional energy correcting the things he's doing wrong than being on the lookout for what his gifts are and what his talents are, and nurturing those. And I think as a parent of a public school student, that's what I want for him, is I want adults in his life that are looking out for his gifts and are going to be cultivating them. I try to encourage him to do the same thing by asking him, well, so your best friend is our neighbor. His name is Shun. What do you like about Shun? What do you think his gift is? What is he good at? And every night we have a chart that we sort of operate on. It's to encourage him to do certain things, and he gets stars because, like I said, he responds well to incentives. One of the things he can do to earn an extra star at the end of the night is to think of someone he's grateful for. And he talks about the person he's grateful for, and I ask him, so, what is it about this person you're grateful for? What is this person's gift? So it's trying to start that in a very small way. I know that's not going to apply to kids of every age. He's 8 years old, but I think it's produced some good results for him and for us. That last piece about looking for the gifts in others, I want to bring it back to the idea of diversity in Hawaii. Because I think that's one thing that we have a tradition of in the islands that maybe not every place has a tradition of, is to look for the gifts in each other and to look for the gifts in every culture that we encounter. I'll finish with this story and I'll give you some perspective on where I'm coming from in a lot of this. It informed my work with Kanu for sure. It informs my work as a parent and a partner. But the first person in my family to come to Hawaii was my great-grandfather. His name was Bunkichi Hotta. He came from Japan on a boat to work on the plantation in Maui, in Kahului. He arrived, he's one of the earliest Japanese immigrants. And he left his family in Japan, in Hiroshima, and he arrived in Kahului at, I think, 14 or 15 years old. And he found life on that plantation so brutal that he ran away after 3 days working on that plantation. And somehow, this is in the 1880s, late 1880s, he made his way from the plantation in Kahului to Hana, Maui. And he was taken in and hanai'd by a Hawaiian Portuguese family for the next 10 years of his life. 10 years later, he makes his way back to Kahului. He can speak fluent Hawaiian and Portuguese. He knows how to imu a pig. He can dance hula. And he meets my great-grandma. And they get married, and she told my grandma, who then told me stories about how my great-grandma used to always be embarrassed because my great-grandpa would get invited to the luau's and he would dance hula. And he was the only short little Japanese guy dancing hula with all the big Hawaiian guys, so she was shame. But my grandma told me that story before she passed away. And after I had a chance to reflect on it, I thought, what a remarkable thing to have happen. You know, here is a homeless teenage boy, gets off the boat in the late 1800s, cannot speak the language, is of a different race, and is taken in by a family and raised for 10 years. Where else in the world but Hawaii would that happen? I couldn't think of another place where that would happen. The years when my great-grandfather was being hanai'd, the Chinese Exclusion Act passed Congress in the US. The Kafir districts were established in South Africa. And the term anti-Semitism was coined in Germany. Yeah, but here in Hawaii, he was taken in and raised by a family for 10 years. So I guess all that to say is, I view Hawaii and these islands, our history and our culture, as a great teacher. And so the last thing I'm trying with my son is to be a good student of that and to have him be a good student of that. So thank you.